Welcome to Free Your Inner Guru, the show for and about conscious leaders and changemakers. I'm your host, Laura Tucker. Welcome to the first episode of 2021. Before we dive into this great big conversation with Nathanael Garrett Novosel about the meaning of life, I want to take a moment to wish you and yours a very happy new year. I hope that we all are able to find peace, health, resilience, and hope amidst the very obvious challenges that we're navigating as a society, and that we're able to bring some lightness to our everyday experience. Before we dive into this conversation, I've got a few updates for you. And if you're a brand new listener, this will all be news for you. So there's been some changes with the podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, or any podcasting app, you may or may not be aware that a few episodes ago, the podcast was moved off of my personal website, lauratucker.com, over to its own site at freeyourinnerguru.com. And the reason that happened was it was getting pretty crowded over on my site, and the meaning and purpose of this podcast has evolved over the course of the last 3.5 years, and has become apparent that it is no longer a means for me to promote my coaching, and very much a platform for some of my own self-expression, certainly, but also a platform to bring on other experts and have wisdom and experience from many sources and voices. So it wasn't feeling aligned just to be over there on a site that carries my own name. The plus side, one of the many plus sides for me personally, is that it's opened up lauratucker.com to be exclusively my own self-expression. And that's been incredibly freeing. And if you are at all interested in receiving a daily letter I'm writing every day and sending it out in the form of a letter to my list over there. My photography is there. There's a number of resources that I made when my main thing was coaching, and you might enjoy it. So I invite you I'll leave a link, like I do with everything that gets mentioned. And then on the other side of things, on Free Your Inner Guru, I've got some super fun merchandise that it feels like I've just crossed a giant finish line. We started with figuring this out last summer, and I was able to get in touch with a wonderful apparel designer who just happens to be one of the owners of my yoga studio. So one thing led to another. The words that have been used to describe this graphic that he designed for the first piece in the line of merchandise to support this podcast is that he knocked it out of the park. And it's so fun because I cannot draw. That's why I'm into photography. Kids who I used to teach in high school, they would tell me that every single thing that I used to draw looked like a burning chicken on a fire. Wouldn't matter what it was. So I know my limitations there. And I received a great big box with the first shipment to our household yesterday or the day before. And I'm like a kid in the candy shop. My husband cannot get over it. I just like jump around vibrating wearing these things because I'm just so happy with how they turned out. The quality is wonderful. The hoodies are stitched and not just printed on or transferred on. I just can't say enough about them. It was a team effort, and I'm so pleased to have something so fun, meaningful, and attractive to represent this show. So I just did a huge commercial for them. But anyhow, that's how excited I am. It's ridiculous. So I will be posting my unboxing video across social media and some photos, but you can go right over if you want to check them out, see what I'm on and on about. You can go over to freeyourinnerguru.com. They're in the shop. That's very obvious once you get there. And it's a nice lean site. I'm planning over the course of the year to invite other people to contribute content and articles, and I will continue to the absolute best of my ability and the number of seconds in my day to curate this content so that it is conscious, so that it is well-rounded, that it is ethical. And the more this interview that I'm about to stop talking and let you listen to has really clarified for me so much around ethics. And, Nathanael, in his book, The Meaning of Life, he's identified from his 20 plus years as a professional researcher and advisor to, he's studied individual and group behavior. I'll just give you some of his bio right now so you get the type of people that I'm interested in speaking to. He's researched psychology, evolutionary biology, organizational best practices, leadership decision makings, business, technology, finance, and philosophy. And his main impetus, his purpose is to understand how the world as we know it works and why. And so within that, he has identified a framework with 8 areas. And one of those areas is ethics. Now, I don't know about you, but I think about ethics all the time, but I would have never labeled it that way. And particularly the more I've become sort of politically engaged and aware, that's when ethics, and as Nathanael will say, I think he said politics is where ethics meets reality or something like that. You'll listen for it. You'll hear it, or ethics put into practice. Anyways, so the ethic of this podcast, or one of them, is that I read every book from every author cover to cover, because you never know what's going to show up in a book, right? And that I do thorough research and curate what I consider to be conscious. And then I ask myself on a regular basis, who do I think I am to be the arbiter of that? And on one hand, it's my podcast, I get to. But on the other hand, my life's experience from teacher to corporate trainer to sales to business owner and entrepreneur, consultant, coach, and the experience I had in the self-help industry really opened a Pandora's box. And so now I am very, very dedicated to doing the best that I can to curate content that is about you first, not about me, not about them, the people standing to benefit financially, but that it's coming from a place of promoting growth and consciousness and truly a better world. Not the better world that we get sold a lot of times, but truly a more human and love-based existence versus fear and ego. And just don't even get me started talking about narcissistic leadership. It does come up in this episode anyway, so I'd just be stealing our thunder. So with no further ado, this has now been 8 minutes. I invite you over to lauratucker.com to check out the photography, the daily letters that I'm putting out. Writing is my big push this year. And then over on freeyourinnerguru.com, you'll see the merchandise, the community that is growing there. There'll be more on that in upcoming episodes as I'm just finally settling on a business model for that I find to be ethical. So I hope you always, when you think of me, think she walks her talk. And so I'll just roll this out as it unfolds and as it feels ready. So on that note, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to a very genuine, engaged, and super knowledgeable person who's written this big book that is going to stay on my shelf for when I need to be able to discern between belief, value, ethics, and some of the reasons why we are here. Enjoy. Our guest this week is Nathanael Garrett Novosel. Welcome to Free Your Inner Guru, Nathanael. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I want to get sort of into what you do and what compelled you to write a book with the very sweeping title, the meaning of life. And you're a professional researcher, which makes this, I think, a bit of a different book just from the outset. So what would compel you to put this work together?
Yeah, well, that's a really big question and long story behind it. Let me try to summarize, but there's a lot. So it all began. My father disappeared in the middle of the night when I was 5. So I don't really remember how I felt about that because I was too young for my memories to really be very good. But I do remember he about 6 months later he wanted us to go out and see him. He moved to California. I'm from Pittsburgh, and I went out there when I was 6 for 3 weeks and 2 days. And then when I came home to Pittsburgh, I felt an emptiness, a worthlessness, a pain I wouldn't wish on anybody. And that was the first time. I'm 6 years old. The first time I asked myself, what is the point of all this? Like, if we're just, sit here and suffer like this is terrible, if I'm going to feel terrible like this, what's the point of it all? What's the meaning of life? Now, I'm a little bit Aspergery, like I'm on the high end of the spectrum. So I jokingly call my robot brain. So as soon as I ask that question, there's a part of the back of my head, my robot brain is saying, that's an interesting question. I bet you there's an answer to that. And without any like emotion whatsoever. And I'm crying my eyes out and I feel miserable. And my intellectual side is like fascinated by that question. So a combination of, my father leaving and having this Asperger's, I didn't even know I had until a little bit ago, but I was trying to understand human behavior and how things worked, how the world worked, because I wanted to, do well in it and things like that. So I studied psychology, evolution, philosophy, religion, like everything under the sun, business, economics. And I did that for like 20 some years. And I work now as a researcher and advisor for leading executives at world-class organizations. And I advise them on how to, manage their teams. So it was just kind of blind luck that I ended up becoming a researcher, though, I'll be honest with you, out of college. But it was just such a sweet spot for me because I love to learn, I love to teach, and that's what I do for a living. So you take all of that, my personal time is spending doing all that research, my professional time, I'm researching and advising for leading executives. And then I don't know, how I was, 30 or something, 29, something like that. And I just asked myself, if I were to impart all this knowledge onto someone else, what would I say? And boom, when I asked that question, my mind just started flooding with all these ideas of like, well, technically there are these, I think at the time I started was like, well, there are these set of concepts, like you have to understand like desire and belief and growth. And I kind of had these ideas in my head that eventually shaped into 8 concepts that underline all of life and organisms. All humans to single-celled organisms use these 8 concepts to find meaning in their existence. For humans, they all use it to actually live, grow, and thrive as organisms. For the single cell, they're not sitting there thinking about meaning. And so when that happened, I was like, I got to write about this. Like I got to write the book that I want to write. And I had all these rules for it, like I couldn't tell anyone what to do or what to think or what to believe or what ethics to have, because that's what a lot of books do. They said, well, you got to follow these rules because I said so, because it's the best way. It worked for me, whatever. I don't believe in that. So I was like, I'm not going to do that. I can't tell anyone what goal to have. So I was like, okay, you get rich or do this or do that. I'm like, look, I don't know. I'm not qualified to tell you that. But I am qualified to tell you the process through which you go to identify goals, to identify your ethics, define them, and then to systematically create a life that is meaningful to you. And that was the book I ended up writing.
So much here. I had a note because I had a way that I wanted to start this conversation with a story, and you told a story that rhymes with it so incredibly well. And it was the story of, this would have been in around this time of year. We're recording in December. I just put up my Christmas tree with my then 6 or 7-year-old niece, Jenna. And 6 weeks before that, our family had suffered a tremendous loss. My youngest cousin, who was 22, died in a car accident. And every year it was my tradition, my ritual to take Jenna and go get a Christmas tree. And we would go back to my apartment in Toronto and set it up together and have hot chocolate. And that particular year, I had her at my dining room table, and she was sitting just kind of diagonal to me. We're doing something at the table, and she looks up at me, and she's got like these crystal blue eyes, like the color of your book, actually. And she looks right at me and she says, Laura, I have a question. I've been thinking about it and I want to ask you. And I'm thinking she's going to ask, what can we have for dinner?
Mm-hmm.
And she looks at me, she goes, I'm trying to understand, what's the meaning of life? And I was like floored that someone that young could be thinking on those terms. And the context was this loss she was trying to figure out and how she felt about it. And I remember enough about my response to know that she was patient with me. And I fumbled together some kind of, well, Jenna, I think, that it's different for everyone. But at the end of the day, the meaning of life is to be good to each other and to be kind and to take care. And now, having just finished your book, because as you know, one of my ethics is that I have to read the entire book before I bring a guest on, is to read the whole thing. And I think I launched into a combination of ethics and values in fumbling around to find the words, because obviously I can hardly answer the question for myself, let alone a 7-year-old when I was in, that would have been in my late 30s at the time.
Mm-hmm. And support. You mentioned helping other people and things like that.
Yeah. So I think the book is a great, we'll use it as the jumping off point here, but for the reader, so that when I picked up first of all, when I got it, I have to say, I looked and I was like, well, that's ambitious, right? The meaning of life. And the cover has clouds on it. It's got the title. It's very simple. And then what's in between the two covers is almost, in many ways, it's very well written and clear. But what's between the covers is not simple at all.
There's no fluff. There's no fluff.
Yeah. And I think that points to, when you really get into it, like the researcher lens, where you're not just citing the things that we see and cited all the time in every single quote unquote self-help book. You're digging deep into the research and putting forward this argument, for lack of a better word, for each of these concepts. And so I've got a list of the chapters right in front of me to use as a structure here. So it moves from growth to your experience, to your desire, to belief, then into emotions, ethics, support, and choice. Now, can we jump into, say, the difference between a belief and a value, or how that fits into the meaning of life?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So a belief is anything that you assume to be true. That's the definition of a belief. Now, there's a subset of beliefs, which is knowledge, which is what you actually can prove is true. Now, what's kind of funny about beliefs is that technically, anything that you're not observing at the current present moment is a belief and not knowledge, technically. Because, like, for example, like you could say, I know the sun is going to come up tomorrow. Well, technically, if you're not looking at the sun and you're not looking at the earth, you don't know whether it's there. You could safely assume that, and that's, it's good. It's a good, strong, valid belief, obviously. But technically, unless you're observing it, you don't know. So that's what a belief is. And so beliefs are important in your life because you have to assume things about the world that are beneficial to you, to your growth, right? So if you believe that your life sucks and that life sucks and then you die or something, then you are going to behave in ways that reflect those beliefs, which will end up creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is a very common psychological term, which just basically means you're going to create the sucky life that you expect. And if you believe that your life is going to be better, you're going to work hard and you're going to see that success. So that's the importance of beliefs. So a value is anything that you place, significance or importance on. I know that's kind of a really broad way of defining it, but basically, you value your own life, right? You don't, no one wants to die, so it's like, okay, so I value my life, so I because I value it, I follow rules, which ethics are rules that involve other people. but you follow rules to basically protect your life and help thrive, help grow that life. And so those things that you value are anything that has any kind of significance or importance to your life. So it could be friends or family. It can be, you can value material things. I don't have any judgment on that. That if you love your iPhone, that's great. I'm not going to criticize that. There are all kinds of things that you can value, but whatever you value, those are the core things for ethics. Now, ethics are a subset of beliefs because the rules you follow are the ones you believe you have, right? So if I hold value, I'm trying to see if I can find something. Here's a little sculpture from when I was like in kindergarten or something. I don't know, first grade or something. So like if I have value, I've had this for like 30 some years. So I obviously value it, right? Otherwise I would just drop it on the floor and break it right now, right? So I have a rule that, I handle it delicately, right? I'm not just like, throwing it around or whatever. So the rules I follow with how I handle this because I value it are different than for something I don't value. Like, I don't know, if I had a piece of paper or something around here, if I drop my napkin, whatever, I don't care. It's not as much strong of an ethic. So you're setting these rules. Now, ethics specifically are around interactions with other people or involving other people. They don't have to be with other people. So like, polluting water, for example, you're not interacting with another person, but it affects them. So you're setting a rule that I'm going to behave in a certain way so that while I'm seeking my own growth, I'm not hurting anyone else in the process. So if I like make money through, mutually beneficial transactions, that's a good thing. If I lie to someone and then take their money and con them, that's unethical because they're not benefiting from the transaction. So that's an example of how ethics work. And so you have those values, your ethics come from your values, and your ethics are a subset of beliefs, which are anything you assume to be true. The ethics being what you assume to be true about what's the right way to behave so that you maximize your own growth and minimize harm to other people.
So in a sense, I've done a lot of values work in my time and have noted that they have changed over time. They're not static. And sometimes they might have been values that, I highly valued something that I lacked in my life, like, maybe a relationship or money, or, like those were things they were associated with goals. And then the older I've got, the more they've become like one of my highest values is the value for growth, right? The value for personal growth. So these things can sort of operate almost interchangeably.
Exactly. And I know, some people will criticize as well, meaning of life is not growth and then they list a bunch of reasons why, like people don't have the same growth potential or things like that. Right. And I said, well, look, these are the 8, you need all 8 to have a meaningful life. So there's a difference between feeling like your life is meaningful in which you need all 8 and what the point is. And the point is growth. It's objectively growth. I mean, it's scientifically provable. Heck, Darwin did. Survival of the fittest, right? Now, science usually focuses on the disproving negatives, right, rather than proving positives. And they're saying, well, the point is survival. It's okay, but you have to ask yourself, well, why do you survive? You survive to thrive, to grow. So, like, Darwin only went so far as to say, well, people who didn't die lived. And I'm going just the one little philosophical step further, which is, well, why do you live? You live to grow. So that's the point. But you do need all 8, right? You can't just grow willy-nilly and like hurt people while you're growing, because then it's going to hurt your sense of meaning. My favorite example for that is if you cheat to win a championship. So we all know the steroid era and the doping and all this other stuff in sports. You hold these people to the highest esteem when you think that they're doing it legitimately and they're just happening to grade their fields. As soon as you find out that they cheat, boom, Bang. The meaning, the significance, the importance of those achievements wiped out. Some people, another reason people still hold them to a high esteem is go, well, yeah, but it's still hard to do. So, and that wasn't that bad. Everybody was doing it. So you're rationalizing it to make it not seem as unethical, because the only reason why you can give it significance is if it was done ethically.
I think also, and there's a particular story playing out in my mind when you were saying that, and he's raised a lot of money for cancer research, or like they start pulling in other, contributions to rationalize or validate what happened.
Exactly. And so, I mean, I'm not saying anything's right or wrong. I don't have an opinion on it. I'm just explaining how it works. That's how it works, is that the significance comes in with regards to the growing to be someone who can hit, 700 home runs or whatever. And then the ethics, did you do it fairly, or did you have some sort of unfair advantage, in which case, that's going to decrease the meaning or significance of that achievement, of that growth, because you didn't do it on the same playing field as everybody else who you were competing with.
You, when you're talking about the experience section, you address the idea or the condition of flow. And I'm going to be daring and try to pronounce this author's name properly. I've watched videos. The book is called Flow, and it's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And
oh wow, that's a lot better than I could do. Thank you.
Yeah, I've had to speak about this book, amazing book, which I'll leave in the show notes, the link, along with obviously The Meaning of Life. So clearly a European name, and the book is about flow and the conditions of growth. And I was really excited to see that as one of the references that you cite. What is it about flow, and either the pursuit of flow or the experience of flow, that is so powerful in our growth experience?
Oh, flow is an amazing idea, because let me give you some context on my, or the listeners some context on my book. So basically what I'm saying is that the point of life is to grow. You grow through experience. So those are the first two concepts. You're guided to where to grow based on your desires, what you want to do, and your beliefs sustain your drive toward your goals, to your growth goals, when adversity hits. And then there's this cool concept in the emotions chapter, which is number 5, that basically says that emotions, it's a formula for figuring out why you feel a certain way no matter what. It's one of my most, it's like as scientific as 2 + 2 = 4. Emotions equals experience plus desire plus belief, or desire plus belief plus experience. I mean, that is literally the formula. This is not like made up or any kind of fancy thing. It is literally how it works. So let me give you an example. If you're jealous, why are you jealous? Well, there are 3 things in play, right? So you want a person or thing or whatever. You believe you should have it, or you deserve to have it. More importantly, you believe that probably someone else doesn't deserve to have it. And then you have the experience of seeing that person with that thing or person. And so you feel jealous. It's those 3 things are required. And here's what, and let me break it down. If you didn't want that person or thing, then you wouldn't care. You wouldn't be jealous. If you believe that that person deserved it, you wouldn't be jealous. You would admire them. You wouldn't be jealous. And if you didn't see them, it would hurt less. So you need all 3 of those things for the emotions to play. Now, why am I explaining this when we're talking about flow? Because flow is the psychologist who invented all this or discovered all this didn't actually describe it this way, but this is based on my research is what is actually at play here. Flow is both an emotion, but it's also a combination of those things. The flow experience is effectively optimal experience. And what is optimal experience? Well, he goes on to explain that optimal experience is when the difficulty of the task you're performing and your ability are in perfect match. That if it's too hard, then you get frustrated. If it's too easy, then you get bored. And so optimal experience, notice this, that optimal experience is is number 2 on my list. The flow is an emotional experience. It's the feeling of being in the zone, of being, completely enraptured in what you're doing. So it's an emotion too, and it's a combination of the experience plus your desire because you want to do the thing, and your belief that you can do it because you're matching that. So the reason why flow is such a cool idea is that it basically describes optimal experience for optimal growth. It's an emotional state that's providing feedback that you're in that flow state. And it does reflect that you're doing what you want to do, which is desire. He doesn't talk about that, but that's what I'm doing. And then belief, that's not really mentioned at all anywhere. And I don't even think I reference it, but you have to believe that you can do it, or else you wouldn't be doing it, right? So there's a belief that this is what you were meant to do, that people who have found their calling get into the flow state a lot when they're doing what they love.
I flagged it because I think you identify it as flow as an optimal condition for growth. And I had a laugh at myself and came up with 2 immediate examples that validate that. The first is that is photography. For me, I enter the state of flow when I'm behind my camera and I've got all my gear out and I'm doing what I would call photography compared to, say, taking pictures. And And I've studied photography. I have the requisite skills, and it's more about the challenge of the situation or the light or what I'm seeing or communicating. So it's like in the learning world, I would call it like the higher order concepts of it, and not fumbling around with the camera and, messing around with the tripod. They don't inhibit my action. The opposite of that for me is downhill skiing, where downhill skiing is the thing that I can identify in my life that I have never been able to improve on. And partly it's because I haven't done it enough, but it's also I've done it enough to know, like, hey, this isn't even a worthwhile experience for me, because it brings out the absolute worst. And in the form of usually screeching from the top of a hill that's just too big for me, right? Like and it's a rather extreme experience, but it's just one that I have abandoned in favor of other winter outdoor activities that I don't feel like I need to insure my brain for. But other people can enter a state of flow while they're doing that. So it's very personal.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why whenever I started writing the book, is like, look, I'm not going to tell you what goal you should have, what you should be doing with your life. I'm not going to tell you what ethics to hold, because you're going to find that. And this is the science behind how you will know that you found it, how you will find it, and how you can foster it. It's not about telling you whether downhill skiing or photography is right for you, because only you will know that. And I explained the formula in the emotions chapter, because that's the formula you use to figure out if it works for you. Like, I can't tell you whether it will work for you, but I can tell you how you will know. You will know based on your emotion, and that's how your emotions respond. Emotions are your indicator of your direction and velocity of growth. So if you are really excited about going to a concert, you're excited for that experience. And you can't wait for that to happen. That's the enthusiasm of having that new experience that you can't wait to have. If you're frustrated, it means that something's in your way, or you're in your own way, and you're not able to do it. And so you've got to find a way to get through or around that frustration, or see the stumbling blocks as a good thing, or whatever you need to do to get your mind right, to switch your emotional state to one that's more constructive or positive.
Listening to you speak, and it is threaded throughout the book, you can let me know if it's a value or an ethic, or maybe a bit of both. But you seem to have you're very precise about not wanting to tell other people what they should do, think, act, or believe. Where's that coming from?
Because doing the research, doing the studying, like, people seem to have all the answers, right? And look, confidence is infectious. People want to get behind people who are confident. I knew very well that if I wrote a book that wasn't, hey, I have all the answers, that people are going to be like, oh, well, I don't have to listen to him because he doesn't have the answers. It's like, well, only you have the answers. Like, that's the whole point. So, but I just like.
That's actually that's why I said yes to having you on here. Also, you do note the podcast name, right? Like, it's you can seek knowledge and guidance, and even so far as mentoring, but ultimately, if we're not learning how to connect with what's true and right within us, what's it for?
Yeah, and so there were a lot of I grew up Catholic a little bit, and I jokingly call it the God exists, so don't eat meat on Friday during Lent problem. It's the idea that, like, the ethics or rules you're following are so disconnected from why you should be following them in the first place, that you kind of don't even understand why you're doing it, right? And yeah, there's a long explanation for why people don't, Catholics don't eat meat on Fridays during Lent. I'm just using that as an example of how far removed an ethic can be from, the reason why you believe anything.
Can you explain it for the non-Catholics?
Oh, yeah. So, oh geez, I'm gonna butcher this, so forgive me. But
forgiven in advance.
Long story short is that God created the universe, and then Jesus came, and then he died for our sins in the Catholic faith, And so Lent was that, that period of time before Easter, where he died and rose again. So the idea of not eating meat it's a symbolic act of personal sacrifice. It's like, giving up things for Lent, as a way to kind of show that you're humble and so on and so forth. Now the irony is that actually fish costs more than meat nowadays, so there's kind of an irony to it. They're actually
So meat
spending
was
more
the
now.
luxury and it was
Yeah,
the reward. So this is like abstinence for a day.
yeah, exactly. And now, ironically, fish costs more, which is why that's why I could talk about the ethics, that come from values and all this jazz. I explain that in the book, because weird things happen if you have these absolute simplistic rules that apply to everything. Then whenever they don't apply anymore, but you keep following them. So the reason why I use that as the example is just because some people follow rules that they don't understand why they're following them, or because that's how they were raised or things like that. When you find out why, then that's fine. Yeah, people do want to show a symbolic nature of sacrifice. Great. I think you should understand the ethics you're following, though. Personally, that's my personal opinion. But the reason why it's so close to my heart, though, to have written a book that didn't really tell anyone what to do, is because I wanted to be the solution to that. A lot of people fall for cults and stuff and that kind of thing. A lot of people, I don't need to tell you that some people follow people on faith to a point where it might actually be harmful to them. And so I didn't want that to happen. And here's the other thing is that, everyone kind of says, oh, they criticize things. Oh, they criticize religions, or they criticize philosophies, or they criticize this, or they criticize that. It's like, okay, do you have a better option? And they usually, well, yeah, if I ruled the world, this is what I would do. And it's like, well, okay, but you're telling them to do what's best for you, not what's best for them. So it's like, well, what if I created philosophy? We got rid of everything that people criticized, and then got rid of if I ruled the world, this is what I would do, and kind of go, well, this is how the world works, and then let me help you figure it out, and then you'll live the best life for you. And I was like, if I could create that better option, then I would be the best book that people should read first, and then they can read any of the other books. I'm not telling you not to have you can have whatever religion you want, you can have whatever belief system you want, you can have whatever philosophy you want, and it's all well and good. I just believe that you should understand how both scientifically and philosophically the world works and how people find meaning, and then go and explore those other things, because they're going to give you answers. And if those answers don't work for you, but you believe in that overall philosophy, you may start to hold beliefs that you don't actually want to have, and that could be a problem.
Yeah, it can. I agree with you on that, and a lot of what you see in, I guess I'll use I'm trying to get away from the term self-help,
Mm-hmm.
and for in the intents and purposes of what I'm doing is it's like self-growth and growing yourself. But
Mm-hmm.
there's an industry called the self-help industry, and a lot of what you see is people proselytizing what has worked for them as the way that you should do things. And then what can get really dicey is if it doesn't work for you, because it probably won't. There might
Yeah.
be some blanket principles that work, but when you get down to specifics in terms of how to run a business, because a lot of self-help centers around business and
Success and money.
success and money, unfortunately. But it's when it does not work for you, then ostensibly there's something wrong with you. So it can turn back on the self as something that is shaming, critical, and not particularly accurate.
Yeah. Well, there's a really good example of that. And so let's take people who are vegetarian or vegan, right? So there is an ethical system behind a lot of that, right? So, hey, I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to harm animals, right? Okay, that's your ethic. Live by your ethic, right? But then there are probably some people on this planet who might have to eat meat, right, through some sort of genetic conditions. And absolutely right. When you switch it from a personal ethical choice to an ideology, let's call it that,
Mm-hmm.
then when someone stops eating meat and then gets sick and then starts eating meat again and gets better, and then they go, oh, I tried that, but it didn't work for me, then the people who are, we want to call them zealots. I don't mean to be in that insulting way, just kind of people who are really far into the kind of worldview and not just the ethic, they'll say, well, that was your fault. You could have just taken this vitamin or kind of done this and you would be better. And they don't really know that, to be honest. I mean, they don't know what that person's individual nutritional needs are. So to like, go from this is a personal ethical choice, which everyone has a person, fine to do whatever you want, and then trying to like force people through judgment and what's the word, shame and embarrassment to follow your ethics, because you think it's the right way to live and everyone should live that way. But then you run into people who genuinely can't live the way that you do, and then you blame them for it. That, in my opinion, that's wrong. That's my personal opinion. I believe that's wrong, but everyone will have their own, ultimately have their own ethics and values.
I had a weird experience a couple of years ago where somebody, and this was somebody who I worked with when I was in university. So, we worked in a bar together, and through Facebook we got reconnected. And of course it got very lightly touched on there, but my story is out there. It's quite public. And so she reached out to me because she was going to go on some workshops and do not a sweat lodge, but ayahuasca, and wanted to know, she figured if anyone she knew had done it, it would be me. And I hadn't, but we got into this big conversation, and I just, I said to her, I support what you're doing here. If you're going to go into that environment, since you're asking, I'm just going to give you some things that I wish I had known before the sweat lodge. And I just and understanding it at that time, and it wasn't all that easy for me to be forthcoming with this stuff. And so I would just, a few things to watch for as far as just awareness of leadership and so forth. So everything went fine. She did the retreat. But she came out of the retreat a vegan. And then before I knew it, she was on my Facebook. I posted a picture of pulling the Thanksgiving turkey out of the oven. And she started calling me a murderer on my Facebook wall. And I was like, holy crap. What happened? Yeah.
And it's the whole thing about like people, once they find ethics that work for them, it's a weird social, what's the word? Social inherent social act that we do, that once we find something that works for us, we want everyone to do it. In fact, you mentioned all the success books. A lot of people who like write success books about money. Let's get rid of the people who like are frauds and weren't actually successful, or they were successful because they sold self-help books. But let's take the people who really were successful and then wrote a book about it to help others, and they genuinely do mean well. Their advice isn't going to work for everybody. It just isn't. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't write the book. I mean, maybe it will work for some people, and for the right audience and the right situation, and people willing to put in the work, whatever, it'll work for them. Great. Like I said, people want to make their own choices. But then like the people read it and go, well, this is the only way to be successful. If you don't do it this way, you're Hitler. I'm just kidding. But like if people would just kind of go down the rabbit hole where it's like, this is the only way to think. This is the only way to live. This is the only way to act. And if you do not act in the same way that I deem to be appropriate, then you are a monster. And I believe that's where things get a little out of hand, and that there has to be some sort of live and let live. Again, I don't write that in the book. That's my personal opinion, but I do think to some extent we have to accept the fact that people have. Yeah.
I'm going to show up as a reader and say, I kind of think you do. I think it may not be overtly stated, but by presenting a full out 80-page chapter on ethics, I can't, and to me, that's what makes this book valuable, to be most valuable, to be honest, because it's not an area that others are really exploring, at least not in this space.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard because it's like, and I write, and this is what I do write. I do use the how far do ethics apply? What are the boundaries of ethics? And what's really cool about ethics, this is what people don't get. They don't talk about this when people say, hey, here are the rules you should follow. But this is how ethics work. This is literally how it evolved. Ethics started with just single-celled organisms just doing whatever, right, randomly, right? And but microscopic organisms actually do show signs, even bacteria and such show signs of cooperation. as in they
That
like move
freaked me
together.
out. As
Yeah,
somebody who had a big eye infection most of this year, that freaks
yeah,
me out.
yeah. And so, and life evolved to survive, right? And so they're cooperating with other living organisms, make you more likely to survive. So ethics are important to enable cooperation, because if you can't trust your, other living organisms to not hurt you, then you can't trust them. So you have to act like they're your enemy, right? And so that's why humans developed, well, not even humans, social animals. Let's stick with social animals. So social animals evolved these ethics to take care of their close family, right? Their offspring, basically, is the start with that. You start to take care of your offspring. I don't think there's any evidence that single-celled organisms take care of their offspring. They do cooperate, but I don't think they have that instinct. I'll have to go look that up. But social animals do. So like if you have children, then you take care of it, right? Take care of them so that because you protect them, because that's basically your, what's his face?
Darwin?
Okay, not
No.
Darwin. The more recent Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins and the selfish gene talk about how the reason why you care about your relatives is because you're actually being selfish, because they have part of your genetic code, and your genes are quote unquote selfish, because you want to carry on your genes. So you take care of people who are related to you because they have some of your genes. So you evolve ethics because, like, well, I value my own life. I value the people who have the same genetic code as me. And then what happened is, as human society got safer, you started to apply ethics to a broader and broader scope of individuals, because at the beginning it was just you versus the world, you being like the single cell organism. Then it became you and people you could cooperate with because you could communicate. I write the 5 things that you need to have to be able to have to be accountable for your ethics at this level of human evolution. But the but yeah, we're expanding the boundaries because we're safer. So it's like, well, I can now agree with other humans, other societies, that okay, you don't kill me and I don't kill you, and now we're safe. Now we've agreed to that. But if you can't trust them to not kill you, then you can't apply the same ethics that you apply to your brother to this other society, because,
Mhm.
well, geez, they're the enemy, right? So what
Well,
happened
actually,
is,
and I want to jump on
please,
that because I
please,
think that's something that I've experienced firsthand is, when you go out into the world, especially if you grow up in a very supportive community, family or community, like I did.
Mhm,
I didn't say anything earlier, but I also grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic schools,
mhm,
and when you go out into the world and you find that, oh, surprise, you're dealing with somebody who does not even remotely share the same beliefs,
yeah,
values, ethics as you. Um, I've been on the losing end of that stick more than once
exactly.
because, I'm inherently trusting because I extend the characteristics of myself and the people who are like me to other people.
Mhm.
And that just seems to be so, pertinent to what you're saying.
Yeah. And we're so safe now, and we can control the environment so much now, that people are expanding those ethics to other living organisms that are close enough to us, like animals. And but the thing is, I write in the book, it's like, look, there is a limit to that, because you're killing trillions of organisms probably on a regular basis, right? Because you're killing bacteria, you're killing viruses. We can have a debate about whether viruses are life or not. They used to call it like non-life entity or something, but I think
Oh
they're
boy.
agreeing it's life now.
Yeah.
But you have to kill pests so that you can eat food that's healthy and not diseased. You got to kill bugs so that they don't bite you and transmit those diseases to you, like, yeah, so you don't get Lyme disease or whatever. And then you got to kill these things. Life has to die. There's no magical future in which all living things can peacefully coexist, because as long as parasites exist, because some creatures evolved to live off of other creatures, humans included. Even if we don't eat animals, we're still eating plants. And so that was life. That is life. And once you eat it, it's no longer alive. It's dead. So there is a limit to how far you can push ethics. I'm not going to say where that line is, because you will figure it out for yourself. But there is a reality that we live in which that we consume other living, or at least organic matter, if we want to go that far, but we consume other living things, and we have to accept the fact that you can push it as if you want, and that's fine, but you have to accept the fact that at some point you're killing bacteria, you're killing pests, you're killing mice. You exist, and you have to take up space, which means other animals can't take up that space. So at some point you have to kill things to live. Sorry. I don't know what to tell you.
And yet no, thank you for disabusing me of that notion, right? Like it's, what relates to this conversation is if you take this to scale, to like societal scale, to world scale, where, and this may be, well, we'll just see where this goes. As an individual, I have to eat something. I can't eat the lamp and survive, right? So I'm either eating plant or animal or something in between, and that's about it. But when we look at the overall planet, it's clear that like there's balances and imbalances, and out of full empathy for my vegan friend, I know she was coming from, I know where the values were that she was coming from on that. And I'm in agreement and alignment with those values, but not at the extent of, verbally abusing someone who isn't conforming to my idea in that moment. For all she knew, that could have been my only meat protein source that month. Right? Like
I have a question for you on that. What is the difference between atrocity and justice?
Oh God.
It's a trick question. The answer is
there isn't.
Whether someone did something to you first.
Oh.
Here, think about this, because if someone
I wanted to call you a smartass there for a second. Now I'm thinking about it.
If you beat the crap out of somebody, you're a bad person, right? We could all agree on that. But if they like punched your spouse in the face first, then you're like, oh, that's okay. That's just justice, right? It's the only difference between something grossly unethical and something that's justice is whether it's reciprocity or not. And that's what's cool. That in the ethics chapter, I talk about
reciprocity and fairness.
There are three near universal, because they're not perfectly universal because they conflict with each other, so therefore they can't by definition be universal, but there are three near universal ethics. So I say, look, I'm not going to tell you what ethics you should have, but I can tell you scientifically that there are three near universal ethics based on which ones that everyone applies: reciprocity, fairness, and minimal harm. Minimal harm to things you care about or things you value, to be exact, but I just put minimal harm. And why is that? Because you value your life, so you don't want to hurt yourself. You value the lives of people you care about, so you don't want to hurt them. So that's where the minimal harm comes from. It's instinctual. You just do it. Reciprocity and fairness, though, are the two. I remember, ethics are about maximizing your own growth without hurting anybody else. So fairness and reciprocity are intrinsic, inherent ethics we have, because the only way to have trust is to believe that if I help someone else, they're going to help me. And the only way to keep them in line is if they hit me, I'm going to hit them back. Because if there's no consequence to you hitting someone, then someone might, people are inherently selfish. They care about yourself first. Again, nothing inherently wrong with that as long as you're not hurting anyone else. But when you say, okay, well, I care about me and you have something I want, so I want to punch you and take it, then that's where it becomes wrong. And so the fairness and reciprocity are necessary because, first of all, that's unfair. And then secondly, you have to be willing to reciprocate. If you hit me, I'm going to hit you. If you're nice to me, I'm going to be nice to you. And if you don't do that, if you break those ethics, you inherently not hurt people. You inherently disgust people, right? Nothing disgusts people more than hypocrisy, right? Hypocrisy is basically unfair, right? It's the epitome of being unfair. But yeah, so when it comes to the ethics of reciprocity, that when I talk about what's the difference between justice and atrocity, is that it's so funny. We're seeing this today in a lot of different situations. I won't get into any of them, but just to kind of give examples of we talk about justice as if like we should do the same thing that someone's ancestors did to my ancestors to them today, and that's justice. And it's like, well, no, it's not, because that you're hurting a new person.
Revenge.
Yeah, it's a revenge, and you're taking revenge on someone new, and you're just going to perpetuate the cycle. I talk about that this ethic downward spiral
Right.
of what's the word? Ethical downward spiral, where if you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back, but I'm going to hurt you with a little bit of interest, right? I'm going to hurt you a little bit more
Right.
because you deserve it as punishment, so you don't do it again. But then they're going to say, well, what I did wasn't bad, what you did was terrible, so I'm going to hurt you more than you hurt me with a little bit of interest. And then we say, well, so it's compound interest.
Yeah, it's like
And
that
so you end up,
vicious cycle, right? Like
yeah,
that just gets
which is why the justice system of modern governments exists today, because you have to stop that cycle, or else it will just keep, blood feuds, right? Where people's,
yeah.
5 generations down keep killing each other's relatives because they did something to them 500 years ago or whatever. You have to stop it. So the justice system exists to pull people out of that cycle and say, we're going to have an objective evaluation of whether that act was wrong. We're going to have an objective way to apply a penalty, and then we're going to call this even and just stop it. So you have to accept the fact that that was justice, and you cannot act like you now have justification to go and hurt that person more. And that's the only way
Mm.
you can stop that vicious cycle from occurring. But the reason why I asked that question is because it's really scary right now that people are not realizing that ethics, while there's someone might have violated your ethics, and you have every right to want justice, but justice is not revenge. Justice is not wanting to do the exact same thing. It's not eye for an eye. It's not let's punish these new people who, just because they have the same whatever, skin color or whatever,
Mhm.
we're going to punish these people. Like, that is a very dangerous game, and it's not going to end well. Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing, and I mean, there's so many examples, especially this, 2020. I think maybe an interesting one to look at, and I was thinking a lot about our pandemic, reading the
Yeah.
ethics chapter, where looking at it through ethical lens and minimal harm, we have these trade-offs, and in many cases, it's trading off the viability of a business to prevent harm to others, sight unseen, unknown,
Yeah.
unrelated,
Yeah.
and vice versa.
Yeah, that's the ultimate. I mentioned the ultimate trade-off in ethics. The ultimate trade-off in ethics is, it's very simple: freedom and safety. It's a trade-off. People say, well, I'm free to do this if I'm safe. It's like, no, you're using the term freedom wrong. Like, you just mean you're safe to do it. You're not free to do it. Free is in you're able to do it. You're not using the word free in the same way. Freedom and safety are inherently traded off. So if let's say I'm in the middle of the wilderness, right, and a bear might come and attack me, so I build a wall around my little camp, right? That wall makes me more safe from the bear, but it makes me less free. I am less free. You're like, well, I could open a door. It's like, yeah, okay, but you can't just walk right through that wall. The wall's there. You have to go around it. You are now less free. You're more safe. You're less free. That trade-off exists no matter what. That will be a trade-off for all time. And so, at what degree people hold, whether that you're like a libertarian, for example, and you hold freedom to the utmost importance, or you're let's go to the other side of the spectrum, socialist, where you hold the public good to the highest level of importance, then at those two extremes, you are willing to give up one for the other. So, for example, or you're unwilling to give up one for the other, I should say. So, like, if let's just take like a libertarian, just philosophy, no politics or anything.
Yeah, we made an agreement before we came
Yeah,
on. Not we don't even have a clue what each other's politics are, but we made an
yeah,
agreement to be able to talk about these things in the absence of
yeah,
politics, to be able to
yeah.
actually talk about the ideas and of it and an
Yeah, so
understanding
we're
of it.
talking about the philosophy, not the politics. So the
Yeah,
philosophy, libertarian philosophy, is that as long as I'm not hurting anyone, I should be able to do whatever I want. Let's just stick with that. I'm
yeah,
sure there are more technical definitions. We're sticking with philosophy. On the socialist side, it's to be, everybody should be as safe as humanly possible, and if there's a certain risk to anyone, then we need to mitigate that risk. And again, we're sticking with the philosophy. So those philosophies are inherently in conflict, right? So take COVID. COVID is the ultimate example of those two philosophies in conflict, because you have personal freedom and you have public safety, and everyone's going to have their own spot on the continuum. And I even, in fact, at the end of my ethics chapter, I have these examples. I have some really bizarre examples like when does murder become justified killing, right? And it's like if someone, what do you call it, a despot like murders people, the mass murder, it's like that's bad. And on the other hand, I have, well, if someone's like killing your best friend or your spouse or something, can you kill them? It's like, yeah, of course, because they're killing them. Like you can stop them. So like those are examples of how ethics are situational, right? So in a COVID example, it's like, well, it's the biggest test that we may ever have, maybe, I don't know, because it's something that we know you don't know if you have it. And so if you go somewhere and you have it, but you don't know you have it, and then you give it to somebody else, then were you unethical? It's like, well, I didn't know, right? And didn't know is kind of part of ethics, right? You have to have intent to harm for you to be guilty of a crime in our modern society. And so if you didn't know you had a disease and you gave it to somebody else, there was no intent. So you'd argue that that person wasn't necessarily at fault. And because of that, the public safety person, well, if you don't know, then everyone should just stay at home for as long as it takes until it goes away or we get a vaccine or something. But then the libertarian side, the personal freedom side, they would say, well, that's hugely oppressive. That you were restricting someone's freedom and right to grow on their own terms as long as they're not hurting anybody else. And you're restricting them for no reason. And so therefore you're violating their natural human rights. Who's right? I don't know. I have my personal opinion. I will not share it on this because I don't want to influence anyone in any way. But that is the conflict. It will exist forever. There's no magical answer. It's only, I say this a lot in the book. I will say it here. There is no magical answer. There's only an answer that everyone can agree on.
Yeah.
And everyone can agree on it through voting or through, a force, is another option of getting people to agree on something. But that's the only answer to that question.
And it's, as I was reading it, you were, and I know that a book takes a long time to write. So this was written before COVID, if it's out now.
7 years. Took 7 years
in my hands. So you had it's the freedom versus safety there, and you're looking at it play out. I think what some of the things that make this harder is the fact that it's invisible, indiscriminate, and where the trade-offs are like, what's the measure of harm? Right? The harm on the family whose business is lost, and the mental health of the people who are really struggling with the isolation and the virus. And it's been a really, I'll speak, you go where you want to go, but as far as your boundaries, but I'll just speak to a little bit. It's really been a challenge because like on my business, I know some coaches did quite well, but so many of the people who I was supporting, their businesses were shut down. And so I by proxy, experienced the impact of that. My husband worked for an airline that closed in March and still isn't open. Like, we took a huge financial cost thanks to the pandemic. My mom's 80 and in ill health. So at the other end of the spectrum, we have to be very, very careful with how we proceed because we're part of her primary support network. And it's this constant negotiation between one extreme of the spectrum to the other. And given I'm highly empathetic, so I feel for everybody, feel and see everything.
Thank you for that. That's a really fantastic point. And it's something that I think all the listeners should take away from this, from what you said, which is that there are two sides of this debate. There's the public safety side and there's the individual freedom side. And those are both good values. And there are ethics you can follow in line with those values that are well-meaning or good or whatever you want to say. And so if you stand on further on one side than the other, than someone else, that doesn't make the other person bad. It doesn't mean that they don't care. It doesn't mean that they're evil. It doesn't mean that they want people to die or want people to be broke or want people to suffer or whatever. It just means that they have picked their part of the spectrum. They've drawn the line and they want the policy to reflect that, and it will have consequences. And
nobody's getting out of this without consequences.
Exactly.
That's the thing.
And the thing that bothers me,
you can't control.
Exactly. And this is the only personal opinion I'll inject into it. And is my personal opinion is that I only want to engage in this conversation with like anybody if they're willing to acknowledge the consequences of what they believe is ultimately the right decision, and that they're willing to accept it and acknowledge them. If they're not, if they're going to say, "Oh, it's all magical fairies if we do it our way," then I don't want to engage with that person because they're being disingenuous, because they're just, well, they're either wrong or they're ignorant. I don't know, because like, for example, if you let's say you shut down the country for, I mean, the country shut the country for 2 months, but it's not going to do anything for 2 months. You just stay inside, then vaccine will come or whatever. Like the alcoholism, the domestic abuse, the deaths from people who didn't go to the doctor. I mean, I'll tell you personally, I've
And
actually
not even for
suffered
not
from
COVID,
this.
right? Like people
Yeah.
not going to the doctor because they have chest pains or something going on that's not COVID. I think that's a huge concern.
Yeah, I just got diagnosed with a vitamin D deficiency because I've been inside for 8 months. I didn't go outside, and I mean, that's the kind of stuff we're paying for making these decisions. And as long as people are willing to acknowledge that and try to find the right balance, then I'll engage with that conversation and say, okay, let's find that right balance. And it's just a lot of people just don't want to do that. That they'll say, hey, look, I'm either like adamantly, oh, you shouldn't infringe on my rights at all, or on the other side, they're going to say, hey, you shouldn't. We should shut down until further notice. And a lot of people who have those opinions are usually the ones who like get to work from home or whatever. It's like, look, you don't have the luxury. Like, you're not a nurse, or you're not a police officer. You're not a person you're putting packaging meat or whatever it is that someone has to be there to do the thing, and they're exposing themselves to a much higher risk than someone who's working from home. And for the person working from home, everyone should just work from home. And it's like that. It's not realistic.
Yeah,
so
how are you going to eat if everybody works from home? It's just not going to work.
That's my only personal opinion on injecting this, is just that you need to have an honest conversation. You need to acknowledge that freedom and safety are trade-offs, and you have to make them, and you will have a different line than someone else, and you should respect that line as long as they're being coming to the table with a fair, objective 360-degree view, and you're welcome to have that opinion. And people are going to disagree. There is no right answer, just one that everyone ultimately agrees on.
If you don't mind, I might layer on too that I think when we get into that territory, it's useful to look at what we each look at as, what do I see as freedom and what do I see as safety?
Yeah.
Right? Like the freedom, in many ways, as constraining as this year has been, I've experienced a ton of freedom because I overtly engaged in a number of creative projects that I would have never engaged in before. So I've got a 30-minute written memoir. I've got a podcast that's thriving, and I've been making. So that's freedom. But on the other hand, I'm extremely frustrated because I can't get A, B, C, and D the way that I would like to.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a big one. I feel like we're all being called to really get an understanding of it. And given that ethics outside of an academic community, how often do we talk overtly about ethics? Like maybe ethics should be what is in the news as far as, the background and what's being discussed.
Yeah. Well, I actually, in my personal life, love talking politics, because politics are just ethics applied. They're just applied ethics. It's like, okay, so we have these ethics, so therefore we're setting these rules or laws or whatever, policies or whatever. That's all it is. And that's why I love it. I don't care about the drama of it all, but I love talking about the philosophy of it all, because it is a trade-off between freedom and safety. It's like, okay, I think everyone should do this. It's like, okay, yeah, but what about the people who want to do this and you're preventing them from doing that? And they're like, well, collateral damage or whatever. It's like, everyone's got to make some sacrifices. Like, yeah, but at what point would that be oppressive to prevent them from doing whatever it is we're talking about? And I love having those conversations, because there's no right answer. You gotta keep thinking about it, and that's why the law is so complex. I always joke. I wrote in the book. I don't make too many jokes in the book, but some things are amusing to me, and that one was one of the things that are amusing to me. Is that the reason why the law is so complex is because ethics are complex, right? It's like I keep making the joke about punching people in the face. It's like, well, when is it okay to punch someone in the face? It's like, well, you think, well, it's never okay to punch someone in the face. It's like, well, no, that's not true. If someone punches you in the face first, it's perfectly fine to punch them back in the face. If you both agree
whether you
to
do
it
or
in a boxing,
not.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
If you're both boxers and you agree to punch each other in the face, then it's perfectly ethical. So like the ethics are not simple and
Mm.
universal and for all time. They change over time. My favorite example I give, I don't know if I put it in the book, but I give it in podcasts, is it ethical to tell your kids to go into this, family business, or to, kind of direct them toward like being something that you wanted to be when you grew up, like a football player or something? And anyone today would say, no, absolutely not. Everyone watched the 80s teenage coming of age films where it's like, you just want me to be a quarterback because that was your dream, you know? And so like, that's what everyone thinks of. Oh, that's wrong. But if you think about it, let's go back to the 1700s, to the 1500s, the 1300s. A small business is very difficult to get started in that time, and you have a large family. You probably have like 10 kids or whatever, and part of the family. And if you don't take on that family business, the whole family could die, right? So, is it okay to push someone into taking on the family business? In that situation, sounds
If it
ethical
means
to
the
actually.
family's survival.
Exactly. I think it is ethical to coax someone into sticking around and taking care of the business in that situation. But in today's situation, yeah, everyone's got the freedom to do whatever they want, and they can be successful. To force someone to do what you think is right for them is wrong in this context. But it's all contextual.
And it also, like, it points back to when ethics become beliefs.
Yeah.
And detached from fact.
That's really hard. Yeah. Because I write in the book a lot about how you have to test your beliefs constantly. Because I made the joke about there are some beliefs that are pretty solid, like the sun's going to rise in the east every day, right? You can be pretty.
Hey, I once held the belief that I could return to New York City and go up the World Trade Center in the summer of 2000. I held that belief. At the time, I thought it was fact. That's a literal true story.
Yeah.
That
And your
illustrates that
beliefs
perfectly.
Yeah. Well, my favorite example is I locked the door, or did I leave the iron on, or things like that, right? Because you know that you did it because you have the memory of doing it. Well, let's just assume your memory is correct for the sake of argument. You could argue that your memory is wrong, but let's say you did it. You did it. You remember doing it. You leave, and you're pretty sure no one else was there. So you're okay. No one else is there. I left it on, so therefore I left it on. I got to go back. You don't know, someone could have broken into your house and turned off the irons for you. It could have happened. It's unlikely, but it's possible. So it's a belief, it's not knowledge. So that's the thing about I'm not saying that people need to get all super, I know this is to be true, and I have to say, no, I believe this to be true. It's fine. You can say knowledge. It's common vernacular to say something. Like, I know I left the iron on. I'm not going to call you out on it, but the idea that beliefs are constantly subject to being wrong at any given point in time is a very scary thought. But it's one that you have to be open to, because you never know when you'll be wrong. And if you hold something to be true and it's not, and you're not willing to test it just to make sure, then you could, I always call it marching off the cliff, like the Wile E. Coyote thing where you keep running, there's no ground under you, and you fall. That's what beliefs will do to you if you're marching forward, and then when your beliefs prove to be false, there's no ground in front of you, and then you fall off and you don't even know why, because you thought there was ground there, right?
Yeah, and the sad and very real, maybe it's not sad, maybe it's a freeing thing, but I think a lot of people can relate at some point where something that they believed to be true was not, whether it was unconscious or inherited through environment, generational, or even understanding or misunderstanding. The idea of examining them on a regular basis, I've always is interesting. I haven't done that in a while. I examine my values more often than I examine my beliefs.
Yeah, that's a really good point about re-examining your values. I didn't talk too much about values in the book, other than to explain that that's why ethics exists, is because you want to set rules to protect things you value. I didn't really talk about where values came from, because I don't know. I found it kind of going off too far off. Plus, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like, how do you explain the fact that you place significance or importance on something because you do, like, I know you biologically you value your own life because otherwise you'd be dead. Like, I know that, but like, why do you, why do, let's go back to my little,
Back to your
why do
sculpture.
I value this? I don't know.
Like, it's what does it mean
Because I
to
made
you?
it. Yeah, because I gave it significance because I
Right.
gave it significance. I there's no way to explain that. It's kind of a self-referential definition, and so I didn't really go into that because I was like, oh, that's gonna get
That's not
too philosophically and fluffy and not really scientific. So I kind of didn't go into that. So, but I like your idea about like you test your values more than your beliefs because, yeah, man, I gotta tell you, I have a hard time with my own beliefs, right? It's like you want to believe in a better future and you want to believe in people and all this other stuff. But then every time something proves you wrong, right? Like someone does something the opposite way. In fact, I talk about this. Actually, let me give the audience a little context. So actually, I can go further back and give people a little personal journey I had. So I mentioned I was raised Catholic, but then I don't know if I would say I was an atheist. I guess maybe I was an atheist. But I kind of, when I finished writing the book, I kind of came full circle on this in the sense that I was kind of trained through school and all this other stuff that, like, beliefs you couldn't prove were stupid. But when I wrote the belief chapter, I 180'd it completely because all religion and philosophies and all these things, what is the distilled essence of these beliefs? It's a belief in a positive outcome. That's all it is. Whether you believe in God as the means through which you want to attain a positive outcome, or you believe in the law of attraction, or you believe in Scientology, whatever you believe is because you believe it will lead, that having that belief will lead to a positive outcome, whether it's a negative belief or a positive belief. Like if you believe that touching a hot stove is going to hurt you, you hold that belief because then you don't get hurt and you're better off for it. If you believe that praying every day will be beneficial to you and then you do it and then you feel better about yourself, then that's a belief that you're better off having prayed than if you hadn't prayed. And so the beauty of beliefs is that you actually have to have a belief in a positive outcome without evidence at some point, because otherwise you would just self-fulfilling prophecy find terrible things because people are starving every day in the world, people are dying every day in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If all you did was look for those true things that exist in this reality, you would be miserable for the rest of your life.
Well,
so you
and
have
let
to have
alone
beliefs in positive outcomes,
and let alone the negativity bias, right? Like, we are, and you've done the research probably. My understanding is that we're all pretty much biased towards the negative. So if you didn't have something to bridge away from that, where would we all be on a day-to-day basis?
Exactly. So the reason why I came full circle on I will never ever again make fun of or because as an atheist I have a little bit of arrogance and never going to do that ever again. Because at the end of the belief chapter, I realized that you need to have beliefs without evidence. You need to have faith. Faith is actually a critical part of finding meaning in your life. And I don't mean faith in a God. I just mean faith in general, which is the belief of a positive outcome without evidence. Because
whether you apply that to yourself, other people, organizations, that's up to you.
If you want meaning, you have to have faith, and the faith is just the belief in positive outcome without evidence. And so a lot of people believe in God. I will never criticize ever again. In fact, now I'm actually kind of critical of hardcore, what they call new atheists now, the in-your-face ones. I'm kind of critical of that group of people now because I'm looking at them now through this new lens after writing the book and going, why would you take someone's faith away, faith in a positive future, positive outcome away from them? I get that, maybe you don't want them to, I don't know, think that that they're bad people if they do something that the scripture says is bad and you don't think is bad. I understand that. I respect that. But there's a difference between saying, hey, maybe you should rethink this one specific ethic, and hey, your whole belief system is a house of cards and I'm going to rip it apart and then make you believe in nothing. And then you're not going to necessarily have belief that anything is worth doing. And I'm going to take your entire meaning and existence away from you. That seems kind of harsh now through this new lens I've seen it. And so it's my hardest, but my whole point of this whole story was that I'm having a hard time because I kind of went to the, like, without evidence, I don't believe. to a point where I'm like, well, I have to believe in positive outcomes without evidence, or you cannot achieve your full potential. And so I'm still trying to work on this day. How do I have faith? I don't know. I didn't think it was necessary. And then when I wrote the book, I realized it is. And I mean, I had enough faith to write the book.
That requires faith. Thank you for sharing that. There's something so, well, I was trusting in sharing that, first of all. So I thank you for that. It's also beautiful. And my experience has shown me that anytime, it doesn't matter if they're incredibly spiritual or incredibly atheist or nihilistic, as soon as someone starts thinking that they and their people are smarter than everyone else and somehow know better or more, that is a slippery slope that never ends well.
Yeah. Well, I have a firm stance on that personally, is that you cannot scientifically disprove the existence of non-physical. Because by definition, science is the study of the physical universe. So therefore, you can never scientifically prove anything that is not physical. Therefore, you cannot definitively say it does not exist. Therefore, if you do say that, then you are scientifically wrong. So it's just kind of silly. But you'll know at the very beginning of the book, I say, look, I don't argue for the existence or non-existence of the non-physical, whatever it is, because I cannot scientifically talk about it, and by definition you cannot. So I'm going to put it aside. And I also think that you don't need it, because these 8 concepts apply whether you're a believer in the non-physical or not. So who cares? Just for the sake of the book, like writing the book and learning these things, who cares?
It's an interesting thought to me, going right back to the book title, that, I mean, on one level, you had to know when you're titling a book, The Meaning of Life, that you're inviting that conversation. But also that the meaning of your life is that personal, that it can be just as meaningful regardless of your belief system. But it's the journey to figure it out. And I enjoyed the book because of that, because it was different than a lot of the books that I've read lately. I love the non-physical and the metaphysical, but I also appreciate and live in the physical and the scientific, right? So that's what keeps life interesting. But it comes down to, and I think this is a perfect thing to bring everything together with. It's like your choice, your agency, and we can be willing to explore and learn and grow. And if growth is the reason that we're here and growth brings the meaning, then that makes perfect sense.
Exactly. And it's funny, a lot of people say, well, how do you know growth is the meaning of life? Well, the first thing you need to do is define your terms. And most people say I'm wrong. We'll define meaning differently than I am. So it's like, well, if we're not using the same terms, then of course you're going to have a different conclusion. So this is kind of silly to debate it. But there are many definitions of meaning, right? So there's the actual definition of life. There's the purpose of life. There's the intent. There's the there are a bunch of different ones that can mean. People mean like the outcome or goal, or some people mean the cause. And you'll notice at the very beginning, I say, well, the cause we're just going to dismiss because I can't prove if it was non-physical or physical. But growth satisfies 3 of those definitions, the ones you can at least prove, right? It's part of the definition of life. Go ahead and look up the definition of life in the dictionary. Growth is like, that is literally like the capacity to grow is like the definition of life. Yeah. So it is the meaning of life, literally, in terms of definition. The purpose, all life exists. What does it exist to do? It doesn't exist to not die, although that's all you can scientifically prove, but it exists to grow. So it exists to grow. That's its purpose. Every living organism shares that common purpose. To what end? You pick your end, so I can't answer that. But it grows into whatever it wants to grow into, I guess. And then third is the what is it? What did I say? I said intent, but intent and purpose are kind of similar enough, so that's the same answer. Significance or importance. We talked about that at the very beginning with the whole, like, what is the significance of an achievement, like winning a world record or something. What gives life significance? Well, just look, this is easy. Just go look at anyone who's ever won an award. What do they win an award for? Oh, well, they won an award for achievement. But no, they didn't. The person won the award. The achievement didn't win the award, the person did. So what exactly are you giving the award for? You're not giving the award for the achievement itself. You're giving the award for the person who grew into the human being who achieved that goal. That's what the award means. That's what gives it significance. That's what gives the achievement significance. It's the growth into the person that no one else could be. They're the only person who could do that. That makes it significance. So if you take those three main definitions, there are other ones, but those are the three main ones that I use that you can scientifically prove, that you look in the dictionary, and growth is at the heart of them. That's why growth is the meaning of life. But you do need all eight. You can't grow and hurt other people. You won't feel as much meaning, and you have to make your own choices. You can't like have someone spoon feed you your whole life and feel meaningful, because if you don't have your own sense of personal agency, you're not going to find meaning. So you need all eight, but growth is the central figure.
Well, I think what you've done is you've presented a really strong framework for it all. I was thinking of that earlier in our conversation when you're describing what the book was, and it just kind of went off as a light bulb. I was like, it's a framework for growth. It's not the philosophy. It's not the way. It's a framework. And what I love about frameworks is generally if they hold up, it's because they work. And so I want to invite people to explore this book. No head up going into it that you have maybe the first 80-page chapter that you've read since you left school, but you apologized to me in an email, and it turned out to be my favorite chapter of the book. So, but it's so well written and organized, and just it's one that's going to stay on my shelf too. When I need a reminder, okay, am I going down a path or a conversation, or am I writing a piece what am I doing here? Is this belief, ethics? Where does it land? Because it matters.
Yeah.
It
and
really
I'll leave your audience with this. If you've been looking for answers, there are plenty of people out there, but if you want to understand how it all works and why some of the answers will work for you and some won't, this is the book for you. It will teach you exactly how, it'll teach you more than you ever wanted to know about evolution, but it explains how life evolved as a means through which how humans today now derive meaning. And then it will explain systematically, step by step, how you can apply these concepts in your own life to create a meaningful life, period. It's, I forgive me for tooting my own horn, but you mentioned, why did I write this book? A lot of Greek philosophy talks about like the good life, and what they really mean by that is the ethical life. And I'm like, but that's, you don't just live to follow ethics. I'm sorry, but you don't. Like, I learned that the hard way. I followed all the rules I was supposed to, and I didn't feel anything. I was like I had what I call perfect child syndrome. Because like I said, my dad left when I was a kid. And so my mom worked really hard and she seemed stressed all the time. So I made it a rule never to upset her, ever. It's like, because she works really hard and she has a tough life, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure she has a perfect life. But that didn't mean I felt fulfilled and magically happy. I didn't feel anything. I just feel like, okay, well, what's the point of all this? I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but I don't feel anything. So like, ethics are not the point of life. And that whole Greek philosophy thing always drove me nuts. You need all 8 of these things. It's about growing in the way that you want, in ways that you believe are going to make you happy. You'll know you're right when you feel happy. You'll do things the right way so you don't hurt anyone else on your journey, because that'll detract from the meaning. You get help and you give help, because that'll make your growth better. And you make choices to shape your own destiny. You do that, you will find meaning. It's guaranteed. It's as scientific as you will ever find. And then go find whatever philosophy works for you from there is fine.
And maybe understand a little bit right going in why it's working for you, so you can even be more discerning in terms of what you're choosing. I think that's another application of a lot of this knowledge. And and you mentioned support, and we didn't really get into it. I feel like we could do a whole other episode on that, but know that I feel like that's an important thing for people to understand, that support is an inherent, and connecting with other people is an inherent piece of a meaningful life. And even in this time, which is temporary in the grand scheme of things, that there is you can do things very consciously to create and grow support if you don't have it. And you address that very well too.
Well, that's why I love these 8 things, because you can dissect anything that's going wrong or right in your life down to these 8 things and help to understand how to improve them. I mean, one of the bigger reasons why I wrote the book is because I didn't want people to fall into cults, right? They're looking for answers. The cult says, "Oh, I have all the answers," and they follow that, and then they leave the cult and go, "Oh God, like my whole life is ruined," that kind of thing. But the reason why I mentioned the cult specifically is because you mentioned support. And why do people get into cults? Because they feel alone, they feel hopeless, they feel like no one likes them, and yada yada. And cults, the first thing they do is they go, "Oh, we love you, we offer extreme acceptance, we accept you for who you are." And they're like, "Oh my God, it's the first time in my entire life where I feel like I can be myself." And then when the cult falls down, they go, "I don't know who I am anymore, I'm maybe they're suicidal or something." It's like, whoa, if you have these 8 concepts and you understand how this works, you can go, "Okay, why did I like the cult? I like the cult because of the support. I felt supported. I felt like I could be myself, etc." And when it turned out that it was wrong and it didn't actually work for me, or that person, maybe the cult leader was like a secretly like hurting people, that's those documentaries showed recently, that it's like, okay, so I like the support, I didn't like their ethics, right? Because they were hurting people. So now you can dissect and go, okay, I need to find that support in a healthy way, and I need to make sure I find it through people who are ethical and not, I don't fall into that. And this will help you dissect that, and then you won't feel bad, and you won't hate yourself for falling for it or whatever, because there is a reason
what
why
you quote unquote fell for was actually was real, right? Like support is real.
It's a real thing.
Are real. Feelings are real. It wasn't.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, Nathanael, we could dive in. It is what the experience is real. In my, as you can imagine, having been called a cult member many times, I've done a little bit of research on, that's not your fault, that's the media. But it's a simplistic understanding of the situation that I was in. And, and when, what I have so much empathy for, especially when I watch documentaries about people who were in cults, and I have a lot of common experience with, when that falls apart and you attached so much meaning to what you were doing and what you were involved with, A, it's very hard to let go, and B, everything that you were feeling and everything that you experienced was actually coming from inside you. It wasn't actually the cult leader. It wasn't actually like, it was an experience that created those optimal conditions for you to feel that good. But a cult is also a broken promise, right? It's not there's lots of organizations out there for any other measure could be deemed a cult, except for they haven't fallen apart and the leader hasn't been castigated for being disingenuous.
The leader gave you belief in a positive outcome, or the potential of a positive outcome. They gave you the support you needed to feel like you're belonging. You felt good as a result. You were doing what you wanted to do, and it has all the things. It's just the one problem is the ethics, and it's just when, like, I can't remember the name of the one, but I right now I'm thinking of that Netflix documentary where that guy was a cult leader. I forget. That might be
NXIVM. There's
the
so
one
many
where the guy
of them.
he was actually raping his followers.
That's NXIVM. I think it's called The Vow, the Netflix documentary. But they're all, if you watch them, they're all the same. And even if you watch the documentary I'm in, Enlighten Us, it's the same. It's a leader who breaks a promise. And
that's, and I gotta be honest with you, like, look, I try not to be judgmental. That's the only problem with it. Like, that's it. It's just that they were doing unethical things, because I don't think, like I said, I'm just as critical now of the skeptics in this situation, because they're going to say, well, it's all fake, it's all stupid, and you shouldn't believe any of that fuddy-duddy nonsense. And it's like, well, wait a second.
And I feel good feeling, but look at the belief, like, and it's like, well, but you're feeling really good about yourself, feeling like that over top of what I do. It's the same thing.
Yeah, who am I to tell you that that's something, some non-physical entity or whatever does or does not exist, or that this is the meaning of your life or not? I am not equipped to tell you that. I can tell you though that if that group starts doing unethical things, that maybe you need to start to question it. And yes, you can either, I don't know if I write this in the book. I might have written a blog post. But I said there are only 3 things you can do if you don't agree with someone else's ethics. I think I read this in the book. You could either change the group's ethics. You can leave and find another group.
It's in there. It's in there.
Or you could subvert it. So you could pretend to follow it and then not.
Yeah.
So there's only three things you could do. So if you're in a group that someone labels as a cult, and it's because they label it as a cult because of that there are some like scary ethics going on, well, you can change the ethics, and then it's just a group, right? It's just, it's not necessarily a cult per se. So like, I'm not one to judge either way, but I do want to help people who are in those situations where the only reason, my only beef is that they take on someone else's meaning for it. Like someone gives them meaning. Like I'll give you an example.
It's from the outside. Absolutely.
Yeah. Someone asked me once on Quora, they said, can someone give you meaning or something like, I forget what it was. And I said, yeah, they asked me, how quickly can you give yourself a purpose? And I thought that was a fascinating question. And my answer was instantaneously. And they're like, what do you mean by that? And I was like, let me explain to you. Do you know what happens when people experience trauma, right? They go into shock and they're sitting there in shock. What do professionals do? What's the first thing they do when they see someone in shock? They give them a purpose. The very first thing they do, they say, hey, focus on this. In fact, I was talking about how I just found out I had vitamin D deficiency. I was just getting my blood drawn, and they're taking a needle to me. I don't like needles too much, so I'm just sitting there like, and they're like, and what is the first thing she did? She said, talk to me about your day, or talk to me about your Thanksgiving. So she gave me a purpose. I mean, yeah, she's redirecting my attention elsewhere. You can argue that's redirection or misdirection, but and she gave me a purpose. So my purpose was not, I'm getting my blood drawn. It's, hey, I'm going to talk about my Thanksgiving. So that's what people do when they're in shock. So you can instantaneously give someone a purpose, because without a purpose, when you're in shock, your mind just dwells on, ruminating on whatever just happened, and you just keep processing and you go down the spiral. But if they give you a purpose real fast and then you do something, you can kind of get through it a little bit more easily. So it's very interesting. So what a cult or a group or whatever would do is that they assign a purpose onto you. My only concern with it is if you don't feel like that's your purpose, but you're adopting one just because everyone else seems to be happy, or everyone else seems to think it's the right thing for you. I just be careful with that, because you should really do something that you believe in. I don't think you should do what you think other people want you to do, because I feel like that's the wrong way to live your life. I know from personal experience, because that's what I did my entire first 20 some years. The book is one of the first things I ever did, which was just, hey, I'm going to write this, and if you don't like it, well, okay, that's as well. I wrote an 80-page ethics chapter. What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? Not read it?
Yeah, yeah, you cannot read it. That's what you can do. But yeah, so I do caution that. But if you do believe in it and you do believe it's your purpose and you're fine with it, I have no judgment on it.
Yeah, it's there's a lot to what you said. Thank you very much for. Yeah, I think being able to go there and have that conversation in a non-judgmental manner is the most illuminating way to do it, because the last thing that anyone needs who is on a journey that's either fulfilling or helping them to grow in some way, or making them experience a sense of belonging, or even to take it outside of the cult context, back out into sort of the success or contribution, where it's coming from. Like, I think we all put on and try on things until we find what works for us. And being able to know where you're at in your journey, and knowing that it could be up for review tomorrow when something presents itself that shows you different or makes you question in a deeper or bigger way. You think of how many people go through a change in thinking and believing if they were to find out in our next moment that they were ill. Everything that we've discussed here would be up for question.
Yeah.
My thing is, how about let's not wait for that to happen or to experience deep loss before you question it? How about questioning it and exercising awareness and discernment in your day-to-day life? And that, I think, generates more prolific conversations and actions and meaning and ethical and behavior.
Wow. You just said two things that were absolutely amazing. Number one is that idea you touched upon, greater meaning. And someone asked me once, that's the reason why I define meaning, is because people say, oh, I don't mean what you said, like growth is the definition of life. I mean greater meaning, greater purpose. Like, what is it all about? Like, what is a universe about? And I said, if you want to find greater meaning, what does it mean? Guess what? It means something very simple: meaning beyond yourself, something bigger than yourself. So if you want greater meaning or greater purpose, help other people or find something bigger than yourself to grow. That's it. It's just, so don't focus on your growth, focus on the growth of something bigger than you. And then there you go, you have greater meaning, whether it's God or whether it's your congregation or whether it's just you're working with people with building a building, or you're trying to send a rocket to the moon or something, whatever it is. That's the greater purpose, is that it's just beyond yourself. It's not just you, it's about other people too.
And
the
it's
other thing
inherently creative, right? Like it's inherently creative, which in itself is growth. It's expansive,
expanding
versus constricting and withholding and shrinking and, heaven forbid, stagnating.
Yeah. So greater meaning was one thing you said was amazing. Now I forget what the other thing was.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No,
you were
no,
telling me I
fault.
said something great and I interrupted you off track.
Oh, what were you just saying? The one was greater meaning, and then the other thing you said. Oh man, I'm sorry.
I mentioned illness. Maybe.
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. The other thing is to rethink your purpose through like some major life transformation or something like, or some trauma or some major setback or whatever it is. That's a really good point. And it kind of ties back to your COVID point. So you can use times like this to figure out what it's really about, what you really want to do. And I know it's cliche to say that, but it's a cliche for a reason. It's a cliche for a reason because you often are so focused on kind of living and kind of going about day to day. You don't necessarily, I mentioned the marching off the cliff thing, right? You never notice when maybe that what you're doing isn't as fulfilling as it used to be, or maybe the situation, your friends that you have aren't exactly the ones you want to be associated with anymore, but you keep doing it because those of you have been your friends forever. Whatever it is, like you may not realize that your values have changed, that your beliefs have changed, or your beliefs should change, or your ethics should change, or whatever, and that maybe you need to make life changes. And it's only when those traumatic events happen that you actually feel free to do it. And I don't mean safe, I literally mean free, in the sense that you might feel constrained. Like, let's say you own a home, right? It's like, well, maybe I've been doing this. This is actually a personal experience. So I live in Maryland right now. And I was like, well, I wouldn't mind a warmer climate, right? So now that I work remotely and I don't have to be here, it's like, well, maybe I should live in a warmer climate. But I have this house. So it's like, okay, well, I'd have to sell it first. Oh, that's a pain. So then you don't do it. But if a hurricane came and blew my house down, I might go, maybe I should just go move somewhere else since there's no house to hold me back. So that's an example of how these traumatic situations that look terrible can actually be used. A lot of people, let's take a religious example lens on this. So God works in mysterious ways, or the Lord works in mysterious ways.
Or
that's
there's
exactly
a reason
what they
for
mean
everything.
By it.
Like, to be even more secular about it, there's a reason for everything.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we find meaning.
Yeah. You can find meaning in trauma. You can find meaning in setbacks. You can find meaning in everything. Because the truth of the matter is, and I'm not a big fan of predeterminism or determinism at all. But there's one thing they have right, which is nothing can happen now without what happened before what happened now happening. So, I can't be here today if my mother didn't give birth to me, and she couldn't be there and have me unless she got born. So like everything that happened before was necessary for something to happen now. I'm not a big fan of that because because the conclusion that some people draw is therefore everything is predetermined and therefore there's nothing matters, and that's so wrong. And we don't have time to go into that, but just say that that's wrong. But it is true in the sense that you can use things like, if you didn't have a setback, like if my father didn't leave in the middle of the night, would I have written that book? Ooh, probably not. So can I really hate or hold anger or resentment or these negative emotions toward an event that might have been the greatest thing that ever happened to me when it comes to my own personal growth and achievement? And when you think of life that way, oh my God, you might rethink everything in your life. And that was the second thing you said that was amazing. And so greater meaning and using traumas and things to really bring out what really matters to you and what has changed. Those were amazing points. And I'm glad you brought them up.
Well, thank you. And to me, in my mind, that's the conscious path, which is why, which I hold a belief, I suppose, that that's why we're here. but certainly why we're here together, which I truly appreciate. Nathanael, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun and so wide ranging, which shouldn't be surprising given the nature of the book. I will leave links to your site and where you would like people to connect with you online in the show notes. And I want to express a big gratitude for you coming on and just sharing your thoughts so clearly and not being afraid to go there, which is awesome.
Yeah, and thank you for being a great host. Thank to all the listeners. Thank you all for listening, and thank you most importantly for turning a personal trauma in your life into something good, which is what we're doing here, which is this conversation. So you're doing it the right way. That's all I can say.
I appreciate that.
Thanks so much for listening to Free Your Inner Guru. It's in reviewing episodes like this that remind me every single time why I love doing this as much as I do. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd be so grateful if you would help other people like you find it by either sharing it directly with friends you think will enjoy it or sharing the podcast itself. And if you have a few moments to pop over to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and any of the other apps that accept ratings and review, I have an app that will send me the reviews from all over the world. So I do see and acknowledge every single one. So on that note, please make sure that you visit Nathanael's website, check out the book, The Meaning of Life. And for now, I'm Laura Tucker signing off for Free Your Inner Guru.